Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi. I'm a fellow at the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. And this week in my Print Eye on China column, I analyze Chinese discourse on uh, Japan skipping NATO summit as a partner, along with other key regional countries, and how they are seeing Japan's relationship with the US and how they are seeing Japan's investment, both security as well as a strategic defense partnership in the Indo Pacific region as the US is getting more and more distracted with multiple crises going on globally. So, for years, China has criticized NATO's efforts to expand its footprint beyond the Euro Atlantic region. And its latest point of contention and concern is that there has been a perceived push to pull Japan and other Indo Pacific countries such as Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea into the alliance's orbit as partner. And they have attended NATO summit before as partner, and they see that this is something to contain Chinese rise, and this is something to form a collective, a global alliance against coalition against China. And from Beijing's perspective, this actually reflects more than diplomatic outreach. It is viewed as the export of Western military influence into Asia and an attempt to contain China's rise under the guise of regional security or under the guise of diplomatic outreach of defense alliance as such as NATO. And in this context, Baidu commentary warns that NATO has stayed from its regional remit, becoming what some calls an overstretched force with global ambitions. And China is the target. And Japan's increasing engagement with NATO, for many Chinese observers, it's not just misguided, it is destabilizing. And it is going to destabilize, it's going to make the Indo Pacific region more contested than ever. But I think there is a relief within Chinese discourse or strategic community because this year's summit is telling a very different story, specifically with respect to Japan, specifically with respect to the outreach to the Indo Pacific countries. And this year, only New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon is attending. Japan, South Korea, and Australia are notably absent. Of course, there could be a number of reasons the crisis in the Middle East right now, and also the US unpredictable foreign policy, the West, the lack of Western outreach to the Indo Pacific countries. But this is a relief for China as the Indo Pacific countries are not attending the NATO summit. And for Chinese strategic community, the absence is telling. It signals a growing gap between the Western ambition and the regional reality, and their lack of interest, their lack of presence in the region. And this is particularly relevant with respect to the US Indo Pacific outreach. And Japan in particular is drawing a lot of attention within the Chinese strategic community and the Chinese discourse. And this is just not about Japan not going to the Netherlands to attend the summit. Very recently, Tokyo also cancelled its 2 plus 2 talks with Washington, which was once a symbol of alliance strength, a diplomatic priority for both Japan and the US. And this cancellation is also seen in the Chinese commentary as a warning sign, a sign that is Tokyo is reconsidering its partnership with the US and the extent uh, to which it could actually rely on the US. And in this context, a scholar from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Pan Wanli, he describes Japan as a springboard for foreign influence in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific region. But this is also changing a bit in a lot of scholars' perspective. And despite a strategic community, media commentators calling Japan the cornerstone of American hegemony in East Asia, but the shift is being very visible within the discourse. Chinese analysts now detect hesitation from Tokyo's side, and what once looked like temporary hesitation now appear, in their view, is a strategic recalibration. And with Trump increasingly distracted by other conflicts, other crises, and his desire to be a global peacemaker and to win the Nobel Peace Prize, Tokyo seems, at least for now, less willing to escalate its defense commitments under the US pressure. And a journalist named Chao Shifeng, he reads Japan's withdrawal from the high-level dialogue as a subtle signal of discomfort. But he also says that instead of fully engaging with NATO, Japan has opted for limited representation at this year's summit. And this is read in Beijing as a careful balancing act, that it still remains present, it's still engaging with the West, of course, as Japan is the main bridge between the West and the Indo Pacific region, but it is holding back. It is engaged, but it is strategically reserved. And it's just not economic caution. It is just not a temporary hesitancy in the view of the Chinese strategic community. So Chinese analysts see it as a broader resistance to externally imposed blocks, particularly those that echo the Cold War alignment, the Cold War mentality. And we have seen there's a lot of discourse on how China has been opposing any alignment or any collective coalition as something that is a product of the Cold War mentality. So I think this is such a relief for China, and specifically Japan has been very consistent. Japan has been very persistent with respect to forming collective security defense arrangement. And I feel in the Indo-Pacific region, apart from perhaps the Philippines, Japan has been one country that has been very proactive in terms of how to safeguard its interest and how to also safeguard the regional peace and stability. Now coming back to the strategic community discourse, Xiang Hao Yu, a scholar who's from the China Institute of International Studies, even though he still describes NATO's Japan as NATO's vanguard in Asia, he also argues that the alliance is under strain and in all aspects, political, financial, as well as strategic. And crucially, public reports, though contested, suggest that Washington may have asked Tokyo to raise defense spending to 3.5% of Japan's GDP. And we have seen reports that how Japanese officials have actually denied this, that the US didn't really ask for defense spending increase, but the narrative persists in Chinese discourse. And this is something that is being seen as one of the major reasons why Japan is now trying to maintain some distance from the US. So Xiang actually argues that between debt burdens, demographic decline, and constitutional limitations of Japan, Japan is caught pulled between alliance obligations and domestic constraints. But beyond defense budgets, some Chinese commentators also argue that the alliance has now become a number game. It has now become a test of loyalty measured in military spending rather than trust, rather than regional alignment, or rather than the shared convergence or common interest. And Japan, they suggest, is increasingly reluctant to play along with the US, play a role of a fiddle anymore. But Japan isn't really stepping away from the Indo Pacific region. Its hesitation and its temporary distance from the US doesn't mean that Japan is not going to resume its arrangement, its efforts to maintain security in the region. What it actually means, and what Chinese observers are also realizing, that it is actually stepping uh, up in the region, but on its own terms. The initiatives have been primarily led by Japan at the bilateral level, at the regional level, and what it is now focusing on is making the region more safe and stable by cooperating with countries both at the military as well as economic level. And also this is being noticed by a number of Chinese scholars. Emerging Chinese voices, young scholars now observe a maritime pivot in Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy. And they say it engaging Japan is engaging more within the region, deeply with regional actors such as India, Australia, and Philippines, while avoiding the formal bindings of alliances such as NATO. So these style alignment is something that Japan is staying away for now, and perhaps this is something that is not suitable for the region, as well as for Japan's interest and the lack of interest from the Western countries. So, in this context, Japan's naval diplomacy is absolutely broadening, and its joiners with India's participation in the Malabar exercise and the Philippines is growing at a large scale. It's growing in the scale. and the new defense outreach to 8 countries, where Japan is now going to sell defense equipment, is also something that is seen as a signal of quite expansion of its own strategic depth and of its own defense cooperation with the countries in the region. So it's actually not relying very much on the US now. It is actually devising strategy where it becomes more self-sufficient, where it could become uh, or perhaps just assume a greater role of a security provider within the region. And one Weibo post actually called this recent defense agreement with the 8 countries as half of the geography textbook, spanning from Southeast Asia to the South Pacific. So there is absolutely a noticeable discourse with respect to how Japan is stepping up within the Indo-Pacific region, even though the US is not there as much. Japan is stepping up. Japan is taking a assuming a bigger role within the region. And from Beijing's point of view, Japan's shifting posture is not insignificant. While the US attention on the Indo Pacific may waver, Japan is not retreating, and it is assuming a more self directed leadership role in the region's fragile security architecture. And the China, US, Japan triangle remains fraught, but the lines of engagement are no longer fixed. And for China, this fluidity is both a concern and also an opportunity. But of course, this is not permanent. But for now, Japan is holding the fort, ensuring collective security is ensured. And this is something that has been a concern for China. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.